Hi there and welcome to another PSD Tuts Plus spoon-fed Photoshop tutorial. I'm Gavin Steele, and in today's tutorial I'm going to take you through Eren's how to create a 3D text block effect in Photoshop. This is going to use the 3D tools found in Photoshop CS3 Extended, and this is the final effect. As you can see, we've got this 3D kind of ridges up on our lettering here, some really cool texture effect and color applied to the text. And we're going to go through this, and you can position it and play around with the effects as we go along using the 3D tools found in Extended CS3. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go to Photoshop, we're going to go to File, New. We're going to set this up so that it's at 1000 by 600. Make sure you've got the resolution set to 300, color mode to RGB, and we're going to label this blocks and click on OK. Just going to bring this over like so. Okay, the next thing we're going to do is we're going to change our background color, and we're going to fill that with a 3A, 3A, 3A. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to set our foreground color to black, and then we're going to grab our type tool and we're going to type in some text, and for this tutorial we're going to use PSD as our text. Now if we go back to the tutorial and we just scroll down, we can see that there's a link to the font that we're going to be using, and it says acknowledge font here. And again, you can get that from this site here, dafont.com or defont.com, and there's a PC or Mac version. You just click on it, it downloads, double click on it, and you should be able to install that straight away. You might need to restart Photoshop to find the font within the list up here. So we're going to be using this acknowledge font down here, and we're going to set it to about 120, something like that. Yep, that looks pretty good. And we're going to set the anti-alias here to none. And I'm just going to move that down so we can just get a look at how that's going to look. And for now, that looks pretty good. Okay, the next thing that we're going to do is we're going to create a new layer, and we're going to call it Mosaic. So new layer, double click, and let's just call this Mosaic. Okay. Right, next thing that we need to do with that mosaic layer is we're going to set our foreground color, this color here, the top color. We're going to set that to a 70% black. So I'm going to come over to my swatch down at the bottom, and just for now I'm going to move that up here so we can see. And if I move my mouse along the top, you can see these colors here. We've got 75%. I'm going to choose 70% for the foreground. Just going to flick to the background color, and we're going to use 85% for that. And just click on that, and then make sure you reset them back. The next thing that we're going to do is head up to filter. We're going to render some clouds like so. We're going to duplicate our background. Command J on the keyboard will create a copy of that layer. Let's go back to our mosaic layer, and then we're going to go up to filter and pixelate, and we're going to set that to mosaic, and let's increase that to 50 and click on OK. Then what we're going to do is hold down Alt, and we're going to use this as a clipping layer. You can see how our cursor changes to those two circles overlapping, and you can see that now our clouds have been applied to the layer below, which of course is our text. Okay, now we need to select these top three layers. So I'm going to hold down Shift and click on the bottom one, and then we're going to come up to 3D, new mesh from grayscale, and we're going to go for a two-sided plane. And then just take a couple seconds for Photoshop to load that up, and you can see that it's used that mosaic layer as our map to decide on the lighter grays being higher up and the darker grays being lower down. So we come over to our 3D tools over here. I'm just going to choose the rotate tool for now, and I'm just going to start to move that just so we can see how that looks. You can see how the light comes off there. And you can see also underneath we've got our second plane that we're going to use a little bit later on for our reflection. So we need to position this somehow. I'm going to go back to our normal zoom, and I'm just going to zoom in, bring this over. Okay, and then again I'm going to go back into my 3D tool and just get an idea of how I want this to lie. And I think that looks pretty good. Right, the next thing that we need to do is, once we've played around with that, is we can also use our 3D zoom tool. We can zoom in and out of our 3D object using that. And just position that in the screen like so. I'm just worried that might be a little bit low, so I'm just going to move this up so we can make sure it's in this top area. Okay, so there's the rendering method that's going to give us the shadows that we need, and the only one that you really use is the ray tracing one, but we're going to use a little trick in this tutorial. So we're going to head over to the 3D window. We can double click down here or head up to window and 3D. So I'm just going to double click on our little cube on our layer thumbnail there. So inside our 3D we're going to select our scene, so it's highlighted at the top, and we're going to check the cross section down here, and then we're also going to select the y-axis, so make sure you select that. Okay, the next thing we need to do is select our mosaic layer up here, and we're going to turn off our texture on the diffuse and our opacity. So where it says diffuse, we're going to click on this little icon here and remove the texture. And again, we're going to do the same thing with our opacity down the bottom, remove texture. And we're going to end up with something that looks something like this. And still in our 3D section here, we're going to go to our scene again, and we're going to set render settings. Let me bring these over. Okay, and in our render settings, we need to make sure that we've got our face style set to flat, and then we're going to make sure the color's on black, and we're going to select our wireframing here, sorry, and make sure that color's on black. Constant is fine, and we're going to increase our threshold to 2. There we go, and I'm going to click on OK, and you can start to see this starting to take shape. The next thing that we need to do is we need to make sure our 3D panel and our anti-alias is set to best. So inside here we've got anti-alias is set to draft. We're going to set that to best, and it's going to straighten up these lines, so we're not going to have any jagged lines. Okay, that all looks pretty good. Just going to zoom out here to 100%. And let's bring this up. Okay, that looks pretty good. So now we're going to go into our material settings in our panel, and we're going to change our ambient color for our 3D object. So down at the bottom, we're going to come down to mosaic. We're going to come to the ambient light, and we're going to set that to 880022. Click on OK. Then we're going to set our diffuse light, and we're going to set that to EE8800. Click on OK. And then we're going to set our glossiness. We're going to set that down to 0%. Then we're going to go up to our scene, and we're going to set our global ambient color. So when there are no lights on, what color we're going to have for our ambient light. And we're going to set that to 575757. And click on OK. Alright, the next thing we need to do is we're going to tweak these lights. We've got infinite light 1, 2, and 3. We're going to start with light 1. We're going to set the color of that to white, and again select OK. We're going to select light 2, and we're going to set that color to 696969. Click on OK. And we're going to turn off this create shadows because we only want shadow from one light, and that's going to be our first light. So I'm going to uncheck that. And again, we're going to come down to light number 3. And we're going to set that color to white. Click on OK. And we're going to turn off our create shadow, and we're going to set that light to point. So I'm going to turn that off. And we're going to set that light to point. Okay. Now I've just noticed that when I previously set in our scene, I set, on our texture on our mosaic layer, I set the opacity down to 0. I was meant to set the glossiness down to 0. So what happened was it reduced this down to the black and white grid, black and grey grid I just had then. So all I did was I went back and set my glossiness down to 0 and increased my opacity back up to 100, and that's how we get this look that we've got now. All of the lights are exactly as we set earlier. No shadows from 3 or 2, 3 set to point, colour set to white, and 2 set to that grey, and again no shadows are being created. Okay, so now we're going to have a look at where these lights are actually coming from. So to do that, we're going to come down here to this little button down here. It's an eye with a light bulb, and that's going to show us where these lights are. And what we can do is, if we just zoom out, slowly but surely. Okay, we can see where all of these lights are, and again I can play around with the different camera views and so on, and we can position them however we like. So if we grab this little button over here, and we can start to move those, rotate them, bring them over and down, and again just play around with them however you like. Okay, next thing that we need to do is, let's come back to one of these. Actually, I'm going to zoom back in. Photoshop seems to react a little bit slower when in the 3D mode. So you've just got to take your time with it. Okay, what we're going to do is, in our camera mode up here, we're going to go up here and we're going to click on save, and we're going to save this current camera position. So I'm going to call this cam. Click on OK. And again, now we can change this to top, and we're going to view this 3D object as if we're looking at a bird's eye view. And then we can go into our camera settings. So we can click on, let's just turn that off a second, turn it back on. And I'm going to select this pan button here, and that's going to allow me to move my third light. I'm just going to move it over here to the right. And then I'm going to go back, turn that off, come back over here and select the one that I saved, our camera view that we saved, and just see what effect that did. And that's another way of moving around our light sources, is by changing the views, looking at it from the top and finding the best way for you to grab that light and move it around the canvas. So I'm just going to save my document now, and we're going to move on, and we're going to set our intensity for camera 3 we're going to set our intensity to 0.6. So just bring that down just a little bit. Now we can go back to our layers. I'm going to duplicate our mosaic layer, so Command J on the keyboard. I'm going to rename that line. Hit enter there. We're going to go into the 3D panel for our line, and we're going to select up here in our scene our preset. We're going to set that to line illustration. Then we're going to come down to the render settings for that line illustration preset. And all we're going to do is we're going to change our line width to 1. And we can click on OK. And that'll take us back out. Now we're going to use the Magic Wand tool to select the areas around our lettering. So make sure you set the tolerance fairly high. I'm going to set mine to 80. And I'm going to click here. Hold down Shift. Click in the middle. And click in that little square there. And just grab all these other areas as well. Okay, so with that selection, the next thing we need to do is we're going to go back to our layers palette. We're going to make our lines invisible. We're going to come down to our mosaic, and we're going to go to selection, inverse. So it's just wrapped around our letters now. And then on the mosaic layer, we're going to hit Command C and then Command V to paste that onto a new layer like so. We're going to duplicate our mosaic layer, so Command J. We're going to call that reflection. And we're going to make the mosaic layer invisible like so. So we should have this layer up here, we're going to rename as text. So you should have text, reflection, and then the mosaic layer. Now select our reflection layer down here, and we're going to go to the 3D panel for that. We're going to head up to Scene, and we're going to go to the Flip or Cross section. So it's this little triangle with a dotted line in between, another triangle, and then the little arrow indicating the flip. So we're just going to select that, and that's going to flip that for us. Then we're going to select the mosaic, and we're going to turn off two-sided. And you'll see now that we can see the other side of our 3D text, and it's a little bit far away from this text, so we need to bring that together. So we're going to come back to our layers. We're going to make the text layer invisible, and then we're going to make our mosaic layer visible like so, and we're going to move our reflection layer below our mosaic layer, so just bring that down here. Okay, then we're going to get our camera tool, and we're going to change the position here. So we're going to select right from the drop down list. So we're looking at these from the right, and we're going to do the same with our mosaic layer as well. So select mosaic layer, change the camera to right, and we should now see the side view and see the gap between the two. Okay, so in the tutorial it takes you through on step 17 how we use our pan tool, and we're going to hold down Shift, and when you've got the reflection layer selected, and you're going to drag that layer over towards our mosaic layer, and it's going to line it up. Now I couldn't get that to work in my version of Photoshop. In fact, I crashed it a number of times, about 3 or 4 times. It just kept freezing. So the way I'm going to do it is we're going to go back to our cam views for these. And I'm going to kind of just rough it basically and just try and line it up and then play around with it. So I'm going to turn my text layer back on, but I'm going to turn my mosaic layer off. Then I'm going to grab my reflection layer, and using this tool here, the slide tool, I'm just going to try and align this up. So I'm going to click on the bottom here, and I'm going to drag it up, and then on the end I'm going to click on this and just drag it over. Let's just zoom in one more. Okay, so we see we're just trying to line up our reflection layer. So again, just bring it up. Okay, and that's aligned pretty well. I think it's just overlapping here on the right, so I might just try and fix that. Yeah. So we just need to bring it in just a little bit more, so I'm going to go back to that tool and just line it up like so. Maybe just come a little bit too far there. Okay, so this way we're going to find we're not going to get it quite perfect, but it's not that bad. Just losing a bit of the edge there. But that's basically how I'm going to get that reflection, this little bottom part down here. We're going to reduce our opacity just so that doesn't stand out quite so much. Now we can do some cleaning up of these lines, but we first need to change this reflection layer into a rastered layer. So head up to 3D, and we're going to come down to rasterize, and we've rasterized that layer. We can then head over to our eraser tool, set the mode to pencil. Just going to bring it down a little bit. I'm going to have a look for any of these edges that I'm not quite happy with, and most of them are over here on our D. Now that's because you wouldn't see this part of our letter, so I'm just going to, just come down. And just take that out like so. And then actually I'm just going to paint over that. Okay, and that looks pretty good. Again, not perfect. The technique in the tutorial didn't quite work out for me, and so I've had to kind of do an odd job of that, but you can see we do get the lines coming along here, down at the bottom here, and this is all going to be reflection. So once you've done that, we're going to set the opacity for our reflection layer. We're going to set that right down to 45%. Okay. And again, now that we've done that, we can see there's actually quite a lot that I missed when I was erasing this area up here. But I'm just going to brush that out. So I'm just going to take that bit there. All of that's fine. These bits here. And those edges are fine. Okay, let's just zoom out just a touch. And we can really start to see that take shape. So now we're going to go back to the shadows that we talked about right at the start, and to do that what we need to do is turn our mosaic layer back on, Command J to duplicate it. We're going to call that duplicate shadow. Going to move that above our text layer, and then inside of shadow in our 3D panel we're going to set our rendering preset to ray traced. Where are we? There we go. Okay, so once you set that to ray trace, come back to mosaic down here. Just let Photoshop tick away. Go to mosaic, and in mosaic we're going to set the ambient light is going to be set to black. Click on OK. Diffuse light is going to be set to white. Click on OK. Come over to our lights, and we're going to start with our infinite light 1. We're going to increase our intensity of that to 4. And then we're going to set our light 3, we're going to turn that one off for this particular layer. So again, we just slide down to light 3. And we're just going to turn that off. So just like on the other layers, we're going to click on the little eye tool, and that should hopefully turn our layer off. As I said before, Photoshop does take a little bit of processing power to work with that layer. So as you can see, we start to get some shadows here. It hasn't worked out perfectly. I'm not sure why that is. I'm just going to make sure that we did set that to 4. Yep, it's on white. Mosaic we set to black, grey 1, white, black 1, 0 for glossiness, that's fine. And we are on ray traced and still on best. Now, depending on the angle that you've put your text on, you're going to have a lot more shadow or a lot less shadow. But we need to go back to our layers palette, and on our shadow we're going to set this to multiply, and then I'm going to use V, and I'm just going to roughly position this like so. And again, because Photoshop takes a little time to process this, sometimes it's a bit jumpy, and especially when you're clicking and dragging, you might not quite line things up. So just while that loads, I'm going to think about the next couple of steps we're going to do. We're going to start to apply maybe a texture to this, and then the overall color flow. So let's bring that down, and for this particular example you can see that there isn't a massive amount of shadow being cast by the lights and the positioning of the lights on this particular text, but it all looks pretty natural, all lines up really well. So we're going to move on. And to get the color, that color blend going across our text here, all we need to do is go to our text layer, and I'm going to double click on that layer. We're going to apply a gradient overlay, so gradient overlay, and make sure you get that actual layer selected. Sometimes you can have it checked but not selected, and you start messing around with some of these blending options, so make sure you've got that fully selected. We're going to set it to color right down at the bottom, and we're then going to set it to about 70%. Click on OK, and then from our colors palette we are going to select this one here, which goes blue to purple to orange all the way to yellow, and I'm going to click on OK. Linear is fine, align the layers fine. The angle we're going to set to 10 degrees, and 100% should be fine. So click on OK, and you can see we get that really cool kind of color blend going across. Now my lettering hasn't got as many ridges in the tutorial, but the D looks pretty good, the S looks pretty good, the P just looks a tiny little bit flat. So that looks good. And again, we can go to our reflections layer, and again we can copy the layer style, right click on text, come down to copy layer style in that drop down list, right click on reflections, and you can paste that layer style if you want to apply that. But if you look, because on my particular example we don't get that much of a reflection, it actually works out pretty well. But you could paste that onto your reflections layer below and that would look great. Alright, the last thing we need to do is bring in our texture. And again, you can use any kind of rough scratched up texture for this, and we're going to bring this in to our document on a new layer, and I'm going to bring that layer all the way up to above our text layer. Let's call it texture. Okay, and then we're going to alt click in between so it only applies it to our texture layer, and then we're going to set this to overlay. And you can just see you get these little rough patches in there, and you can actually move it around till you get the desired effect. So you've got this big streak coming through. That doesn't quite work, but this little streak might work just here. And those little dots, and just bring that over. Now I know some of the steps didn't quite work out for me, but the overall effect is pretty similar. Just going to zoom in 200% just so we can see how that looks. I think the D probably worked out the best out of all the lettering, and the S is pretty good. Just the P is just a little bit flat here, so you can't quite tell with the ridges, but overall I'm pretty happy with that, and I hope you enjoyed the tutorial. And as I'm learning all these 3D tools, getting the most out of it. It's a great tutorial by Eren. Hope you enjoyed that from PSD Tuts Plus. I've been Gavin Steele, and I hope you come back and check out our future tutorials.